There was more aching sensation, and there was a lot more swelling and a lot more rehab time.
Hall of Fame catcher Gary Carter has died. Gary Carter had been fighting brain cancer for well over a year now.
The sad end of Gary Carter, one of baseball's brightest stars, came far too soon. He died at just 57 years old after a brutal 9-month battle with aggressive, inoperable brain cancer. But what makes his story even more heartbreaking is the paradox that defined his life. While millions of fans knew him as the Kid for his infectious smile and boundless enthusiasm, many of his own teammates couldn't stand him. They mocked him with cruel nicknames like Camera Carter and Teeths, convinced his famous grin was nothing but a fake act for the cameras. So how could one of baseball's most beloved public figures be so disliked in his own locker room? And was that happy-go-lucky persona even real? The answer would only become clear in the darkest moment of his life. Gary Carter burst onto the baseball scene with the Montreal Expos in the early 1970s, earning his famous nickname The Kid during spring training in 1973. Veterans watched this young catcher trying to win every sprint and hit every pitch out of the park, and they couldn't help but notice his incredible energy. At first, it seemed endearing, but as the years went on, that same enthusiasm started to grate on his teammates. The problem wasn't his talent. Everyone knew he was great. By 1984, he was widely considered the best catcher in baseball. The issue was his personality. Some players saw Carter's constant excitement as calculated self-promotion. They thought he cared more about his image than the team. This resentment had nothing to do with his performance on the field. Instead, it was a clash between Carter's genuine love for the spotlight and the cynical, reserved culture of the baseball clubhouse. His teammates couldn't accept that someone could be that enthusiastic and still be sincere. The friction showed itself in a series of mean-spirited nicknames. Behind his back, Expos players called him Camera Carter, Lights, and Teeths. All of these names mocked his eagerness for media attention and his constant, wide smile. For these teammates, Carter was too absorbed in his public image. They saw him as fake, but there was another layer to their resentment. Carter was a devout Christian who lived differently from most baseball players of that era. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't curse or talk trash. He was committed to his family and even refused to promote products with sugar on television because he didn't want to set a bad example for kids. In the rough and tumble world of professional baseball, where hard living was the norm, Carter was seen as an outsider. One report said he was deemed a geek from the very beginning because he abstained from all the common vices. The Montreal clubhouse wasn't equipped to handle someone so sincere and disciplined, and internal conflicts festered. During his years with the Expos, Carter became one of the most dominant catchers in baseball history. He was a 6-time All-Star with Montreal, won 3 Gold Glove Awards, and led the National League in runs batted in during 1984. He hit 298 career home runs as a catcher, putting him among the elite at his position. The Montreal fans absolutely loved him. He became the face of the franchise, a beacon of hope for a city that embraced baseball with passion. But inside the clubhouse, the story was different. The disconnect between his public adoration and private rejection created a painful reality that Carter had to live with every day. The situation reveals something important about professional sports culture during that era. Baseball clubhouses in the 1970s and 1980s were often places where machismo ruled, where players bonded over drinking and late nights, where showing too much emotion or caring too much about your public image could get you labeled as soft or self-centered. Carter didn't fit that mold. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He loved talking to reporters. He enjoyed being in the spotlight. And he made no apologies for his faith or his family-first lifestyle. In many ways, he was ahead of his time, a player who understood the power of personal branding before it became common in sports. It's one thing to be disliked by rivals, but it's another to be an outcast on your own team. Do you think Carter's teammates were just jealous, or was his personality genuinely grating? Let us know your take in the comments below, and if you're finding this story compelling, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. Everything changed when Carter was traded to the New York Mets in December 1984. The Mets saw him as the final piece they needed to stabilize their promising but chaotic young roster. General manager Frank Cashen gave up 4 players to get him, including Hubie Brooks, Mike Fitzgerald, Herm Winningham, and Floyd Humans. Cashen believed Carter's presence would have an incalculable impact on the team. For Carter, the trade was a dream come true. It gave him a chance to play in a World Series, something he'd always wanted. He was thrilled about the opportunity and anxious to contribute. Carter made an immediate impact in New York. On opening day 1985, he hit a walk-off home run, instantly winning over the fans who had packed the stadium. It was the perfect introduction, a moment that announced his arrival in dramatic fashion. He followed that up with a career-high 32 home runs and 100 runs batted in during his first season, a first for the Mets franchise. The numbers were impressive, but his biggest contribution wasn't his stats. It was his leadership. Some Mets players admitted they had negative opinions of Carter before he joined the team. Teammate Mookie Wilson said they didn't like him because of his perpetual smile and constant talking on the field. When you're competing against someone who seems that happy all the time, it can be irritating. But once they played with him, everything changed. The 1980s Mets clubhouse was known for chaos and hard living. This was a team filled with talented but volatile personalities, players who pushed boundaries and tested limits. In that environment, Carter's consistent, disciplined character became exactly what the team needed. The very traits that made him a geek in Montreal made him a leader in New York. Pitcher Ron Darling called Carter the team's moral compass. In a clubhouse that could easily spin out of control, Carter provided stability. Darryl Strawberry said that in the midst of all the chaos, Carter was an example of a baseball player with character. He lived right, loved his wife and kids, and treated everybody with first-class respect. Dwight Gooden credited Carter as a true friend, who always put his teammates' health first and baseball second. This was especially meaningful coming from Gooden, who would later struggle with substance abuse issues. Having someone like Carter in the clubhouse, someone who genuinely cared about his teammates as people rather than just as players, made a real difference. In New York, Carter's sincerity and discipline were no longer resented as showmanship. They were recognized as essential leadership qualities. His personality wasn't the problem. The cultural mismatch with his former team was. The Mets needed someone to anchor them, to remind them of what was important, to keep them focused when distractions threatened to derail their season. Carter filled that role perfectly. He was the veteran presence who had seen it all, who could handle the pressure of playing in New York, and who could inspire younger players to be better versions of themselves. The 1986 season became the defining moment of Carter's career. The Mets dominated the National League, winning 108 games during the regular season. They advanced to the World Series against the Boston Red Sox, and the series went to a dramatic Game 6. The Mets were down to their final out when Carter stepped to the plate and singled to start a rally. That hit kept hope alive, and the Mets eventually won the game in one of the most famous comebacks in baseball history. They won Game 7 and claimed the championship. For Carter, it was the ultimate validation. He had finally won the World Series, and he had done it as a leader, as the moral center of a team that desperately needed his steady hand. After his playing career ended in 1992, Carter stayed involved in baseball through broadcasting and coaching. He spent years working in the minors and independent leagues, passing on his knowledge to younger players who were trying to make it to the big leagues. But his final professional stop was the most meaningful. From 2009 until his death, he served as head baseball coach at Palm Beach Atlantic University, a Christian school in Florida. This environment perfectly matched his lifelong values. The sincere enthusiasm and strong faith that had once caused friction in the professional arena are now celebrated as inspirational leadership. At Palm Beach Atlantic, Carter found a home where his whole self was welcomed. He didn't have to hide his faith or tone down his enthusiasm. The university embraced who he was, and he thrived in that environment. His commitment to family was also evident. His daughter, Kimmy Blomers, served as the head softball coach at the same university, creating a beautiful family legacy within the school. Carter's impact on his players was profound. He taught them about baseball, but he also taught them about character, integrity, and living a life of purpose. When Carter passed away, the players' immediate reaction was to pray and give thanks for his guidance. It was a fitting end to a life defined by consistent character. But the true test of Gary Carter's character came in May 2011, when he sought medical attention for persistent headaches and forgetfulness. The test came back with devastating news. He was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of brain cancer. Doctors found 4 malignant tumors in his brain. They were inoperable. The cancer had already spread too far for surgery to be an option. The prognosis was bleak. Glioblastoma is a grade 4 glioma, the most common and most fatal primary malignant brain tumor. It grows rapidly and destroys healthy tissue around it. Only about 40% of patients with this type of cancer survive the first year after diagnosis. Carter was 57 years old, younger than the typical diagnosis age of 64, which made the situation even more tragic. He immediately began intense chemotherapy, hoping the treatments could shrink the tumors and buy him more time. The 9 months that followed were brutal. Carter suffered from constant headaches that wouldn't go away no matter what medications he took. He experienced forgetfulness that grew worse over time, a cruel symptom for someone whose mental sharpness had always been one of his greatest assets. He had debilitating falls that scared his family and showed just how much the disease was affecting his balance and coordination. One fall happened on Christmas Eve, a holiday that should have been filled with joy but instead was marked by fear and worry. Another fall occurred during a doctor's appointment and left him with a completely torn rotator cuff, adding physical injury to the already overwhelming challenge of fighting cancer. By January 2012, an MRI revealed several new tumors growing in his brain. The cancer was winning despite all the treatments. The disease was progressing exactly as doctors had feared it would, with new lesions appearing and the existing tumors continuing to grow. For a man whose professional identity relied on mental sharpness and a stable, upbeat personality, the disease attacked everything that made him who he was. It targeted his brain, the very organ that controlled his thoughts, his memories, and his personality. Yet despite the overwhelming physical and mental toll, Gary Carter confronted his illness with the same grit and optimism that had defined his playing. Days. He maintained his infectious smile and enthusiasm until the very end. His family shared updates about his condition, and even in the darkest moments, they talked about his unwavering faith and positive attitude. This is the part of the story that matters most. The earlier critics who labeled him Teethes or Camera Carter suggested that his smile was calculated or artificial, just an act for the media. If that smile had been merely a performance, it would have faded under the relentless pressure of an inoperable brain tumor. But it didn't. It stayed. Even as his body failed him, even as his mind was under attack, even as he faced death, Gary Carter remained the kid at heart. His smile was real. His enthusiasm was genuine. His faith was unshakable. Years earlier, during his Hall of Fame induction speech in 2003, Carter had acknowledged his aging body but declared, "I will always be a kid at heart." He chose to wear an Expos cap for his induction, honoring the franchise where he had spent most of his career and where he had first earned his famous nickname. That moment was a celebration of everything he had accomplished, a recognition that he belonged among the greatest players in baseball history. With 324 home runs and 2,092 hits, his numbers spoke for themselves. But his legacy was about more than statistics. It was about the joy he brought to the game, the leadership he provided to his teams, and the character he displayed throughout his life. That spirit, tested by one of the most fatal forms of cancer, proved authentic and unwavering. On February 16, 2012, Gary Carter passed away at his home in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, at the age of 57. His death was tragically premature, robbing the world of a man who still had so much to give. But it concluded a life defined by consistent character, a life that showed the power of staying true to yourself even when others don't understand you. Gary Carter's story is a powerful reminder that a person's true character is revealed in the darkest of times. He was celebrated by fans but resented by some teammates who thought his smile was fake. His move to the Mets proved that his personality was a strength, not a weakness, and his battle with cancer proved that the smile his cynical teammates mocked was completely genuine. It wasn't a performance, it was who he truly was. In the end, the kid taught us that authenticity and faith can carry you through anything, even when everything is taken away. If you were moved by his journey, please hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible sports stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.